You ever get that feeling that Mother Nature is a bit of a bitch sometimes? Yeah, but don't worry, it's likely for the same reasons you are. That's right, unfathomable, soul-crushing pressure. Volcanoes have a long and complicated relationship with humans, and like floods, are often seen as divine manifestations of life and death. But before we dive in face first like a virgin sacrifice, we should probably get some terminology straight. A volcano is a rupture in the crust of a planetary mass object, such as Earth, that allows hot lava, volcanic ash, and gases to escape from a magma chamber below the surface. On Earth, volcanoes are usually found where tectonic plates are diverging or converging, and most are found underwater. For example, a mid-ocean ridge such as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge has volcanoes caused by divergent tectonic plates, whereas the Pacific Ring of Fire has volcanoes caused by convergent tectonic plates. Volcanoes can also form where there is stretching and thinning of the crust's plates, such as the East African Rift and the Wells Gray Clearwater volcano field and Rio Grande Rift in North America. Volcanism away from plate boundaries has been postulated to arise from upwelling diapirs of the core mantle boundary at 3,000 kilometers or 1,900 miles deep in the Earth. This results in hotspot volcanism, of which the Hawaiian hotspot is an example. Volcanoes are usually not created where two tectonic plates slide past one another. Yeah, okay, that's a bit of a mouthful for anyone who isn't a trained geologist, but what's really important for the layman to understand is that the surface of the Earth's crust is made up of colossal plates of rock that rest on a sea of more dense, viscous magma. Floating on the surface like scum on water, how these plates interact with each other is how we get geologic movement like earthquakes and volcanoes. TLDR, a volcano is basically just a point at which the pressure of the magma underneath the Earth becomes greater than the pressure of the stone above it, forcing it to melt through the stone until it explodes onto the surface like a zit on a date night. The terms lava and magma are often used interchangeably, but that's not exactly accurate. Magma is molten rock underneath the Earth's surface, while lava is molten rock that has surfaced. So they kinda are the same, but one is just for what's under the Earth and the other is just what's either oozing down the mountain or raining from the sky. So before we delve too deep into volcanoes specifically, we need to discuss the planet itself. The Earth is a flat, disc-shaped rock that The Earth is a semi-ovular shaped sphere rotating around our sun due to its greater mass, and by extension, greater gravitational pull. Why did I say ovular? Well, have you ever seen a ball thrown in slow motion? When it tends to widen out a little bit, that's the result of the centrifugal force throwing the sides further out, contracting the top and bottom. Meaning that the lowest point on the Earth isn't actually the Marianas Trench like you would expect, but more near the poles. And the highest point on the Earth is actually closer to the equator. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, the weight of 6.6 billion trillion tons of stone hurtling through space creates a lot of energy, and that makes a lot of heat. Like, a lot of heat. With all of the planet's weight centralized at its gravitational center, everything inside it melts, creating the Earth's liquid molten core. Right? Well, you would be wrong! More accurately, the Earth's core isn't actually liquid, it's solid. Like Ice-12, which I'd like to talk about in another video someday, sufficient pressure will cause liquid objects to become dense enough to technically become a solid. Crazy, I know. By mass, our planet is mostly iron at 32 to 35%, meaning that our core is actually more of a colossal ball bearing. But wait, I said that tectonic plates float, right? How can they float on a solid object? Well, here is where your mental image of a liquid core comes into place. Just outside the solid core is a more thin semi-liquid core, where the pressure is reduced due to the less weight above it. Okay, so now we know how the Earth's mantle and crust floats on it, but what makes them move? Well, if you dig deep down into the recesses of your tiny brain, you might remember your 8th grade science teacher mentioning something called convection. But if you don't remember, don't worry, because I'm sure your poor ass probably still boils water for instant noodles all the time. As you know, heat rises, and whenever you boil water, the water on the bottom rises to the top. Now, not all of it can rise at the same time, because otherwise it would just float, which would admittedly be pretty gnarly, but not if gravity has anything to say about it. So, as the hottest water rises to the top, it then cools and flows back down. This creates a series of cycles of boiling liquids, and magma is no exception. This bubbling convection is what causes our tectonic plates to move, albeit incredibly slowly, rarely more than 4 inches or 10 centimeters a year. You could even imagine the plates as, say, immense tea leaves dancing on the surface of boiling water. And because the plates move, that means the volcanoes do as well. You can actually see this just by looking at a map. Volcanic archipelagos often come in chains called island arcs. The more obvious ones being places like Hawaii, Japan, the Philippines, the Aegean Arc, or the Solomon Isles. Now we can finally get back to volcanoes. The word comes from the name Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, metallurgy, and smithing. Volcanoes are generally made out of something called igneous rocks, meaning fire in Latin. such as granite, meaning that they were once slowly cooling stones fused together by tiny crystals. Volcanic hotspots are theorized to be created by something called a mantle plume, which are columns of hot material rising from the core to mantle boundary. As with mid-ocean ridges, the rising mantle rock experiences decompression melting, which generates large volumes of magma. Because tectonic plates move across these mantle plumes, each volcano dies off as it drifts off that spot, and a new volcano is created where the plate moved over it. At the time I'm creating this video, our planet has about 500 active ones, and more than half of these make up a large portion of the Pacific Ocean, which is the aptly named the Burning Ring of Fire. But the largest one we know of isn't even on Earth. Mars is thought to have almost no tectonic plates at all, meaning that there are less cracks for the pressure to escape. Olympus Mons, as it is called, has a height of 17 miles or 27 kilometers and a diameter of 342 miles or 550 kilometers. For reference, that's almost as big as the entirety of the UK. They also vary a lot in how active they are, and it's incredibly difficult to tell when one is extinct or just dormant. Some volcanoes like Yellowstone only erupt once every 700,000 years, while others like Kilauea and Mauna Loa are detonating every other year or so. You may be tempted to think that this makes them grow rather slowly. The Earth is huge after all. But in some cases, volcanoes can grow faster than you're described by that weird old lady you don't know at your grandma's Thanksgiving. The Paracutin volcano began growing in a Mexican cornfield back in February of 1943. In less than a week, it was 50 feet tall or 15 meters high. By December of the same year, it was 1,100 feet or 336 meters. My submission for the obvious statement of the year is that volcanoes are dangerous for a whole slew of reasons. The contents and shape of the Earth can result in different kinds of eruptions. Phreatic ones can be created by steam through superheated groundwater. High contents of silica can cause it to rain felsic shards of rhyolite. And pyroclastic flows and lahars rain down the hill with burning hot gas, mud, water, and other generic debris called tephra. And lastly, we can't possibly forget the good old-fashioned blazing basalt boulders raining from the sky and chasing you down the mountain like you just ganked a cursed golden monkey idol. This one's my favorite for obvious reasons. And if that isn't hardcore enough, sometimes the amount of debris in the air can build up an electrical charge in an eruption plume. If there's enough, you can get a divine smite of righteousness along with your earth-shattering explosions. Volcanic gases and ash can be blasted as high as the stratosphere at 31 miles or 50 kilometers. Sulfuric acid aerosols can block out the solar radiation, and ash can blot out the very sun itself. There can be so much acidic rain that it kills crop fields, and ash-darkened skies can last for years, creating widespread famine. The Wana Putina eruption of 1601 created a volcanic winter that was thought to have starved up to 2 million Russians, which was almost 30% of the entire population at that time. Geez, you guys are always getting screwed over for food. Chemical reactions with the ozone cause incalculably more damage than your Ford F-250, and the acid rains can toxify nearby water sources. But don't worry, they can even perform thousands of car washes at once across entire oceans through their generation of tsunamis. And that's not even discussing the whole death by scorching boulders of hellfire bit. We will classify all this as the kind of a bummer part of this topic. On a lighter note, they also have some pretty critical benefits as well. Volcanic ash and time-worn basalt makes for some of the most fertile soil on the planet. Nutrient-rich elements like iron, magnesium, potassium, calcium, and phosphorus are all reasons why these volcanic islands are some of the most violently lush green environments in the world. Layered ash will eventually lithify, which basically means that the moisture evaporates out of it as the ash compacts, creating a type of natural cement. Think of it like petrification or fossilization, but for minerals instead of organic material. This stuff was called tuff, and its relatively soft composition made it an exceedingly popular building material. Still surviving today, many of ancient Rome's most long-standing architectural achievements were made from it. And if you want a really clear image of what the stuff looks like, look no further than the Maui statues the people of Rapa Nui built on Easter Island, because that's exactly what they're made of. There are even types of small airborne droplets of volcanic glass that rain from the sky called Nawaimaka Opele, or Pele's tears, as well as long, thin strands of molten glass that stretched while being blasted into the sky, commonly called Luoho Opele, or Pele's hair, both of which were named after the Hawaiian fire goddess of earthquakes and volcanoes. I'd like to make a video on her at some point, but we're going to be going in a different direction today. Because so much of the planet's molten core is made of iron, volcanoes also force tons of useful and valuable ores up to the surface, and the explosive pressure of these earth-chan pimples can be released and harnessed using geothermal power. Alright, enough of that sciencey nerd. Let's get on to my favorite part. How to pick the best virgins to appease the divine wrath of your angered volcano god. What, you think I'm joking? We'll see about that. Naturally, the destructive and creative forces of volcanoes had a profound effect on the people who bore witness to these geological cataclysms. And as a result, they have strong ties with both religion and tradition. In ancient times, the Romans sacrificed fish to the god of the forge, Vulcan. The Greek philosopher Empedocles hurled himself into the gaping maw of Mount Etna sometime around 430 BC. I like to think this is where the people of Pompeii screwed up in 79 AD. On certain occasions, the people of Naples would parade a skull and blood reliquaries of St. Januarius around Mount Vesuvius. There are even old documents that show they genuinely believed this stopped numerous eruptions. Back in July of 2017, a man named Leo Adonis was found Anakin Skywalkered inside the caldera of the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii. Even today, it's pretty common to see people performing pilgrimages to the top of Mount Bromo in Java to pray and hurl in offerings of livestock and birds. This Tengger tribe traces this Yajna Kasada festival tradition to the Javanese princess Roro in the 15th century. Evidently, the Hindu gods promised her and her husband 24 children on the condition that the 25th be used to appease the volcano. Damn, that's a lot of kids. Sometime in 1000 AD, Iceland was in a hot debate over whether or not to convert to Christianity or stick with their older Norse gods. When a volcano erupted near Reykjavik, the pagans cried out that it was because the gods had been angered by this transgression. But when a Christian philosopher simply asked what they did to piss the gods off during other eruptions in the past, they had no answer. And that pretty much put an end to the theological debate right there. There was even an incredibly badass poem that predicted the end of the Nordic gods called the Voluspa, which reads, "The sun starts to turn black, land sinks into the sea, and the bright stars scatter from the sky. Steam spurts up from what nourishes life, and flame flies high against the heavens itself." When Hawaii was slowly modernizing in 1824, a chiefess named Kapi'olani stood on the edge of the Halemaumau crater and prayed to Christ in defiance of Pele, proving that not even their volcano god could smite her for transgressions while under the Lord's protection. Now I know what you're thinking, Drifter-Dono, where are all the virgins? These are all animals or suicides. Well, boy do I have a surprise for you. Enter the religion of the Mapuche people of southern Chile. Up until as late as the 1960s, the people of Calilefu were still highly isolated from the rest of the modern world, and did not fully understand geological science at that time. The Machi, or healers or witch doctors of the region, claimed that these volcanic eruptions and earthquakes were attributed to a mythical monster called the Charufe. These abominations were enormous, humanoid creatures of magma and crystal, spawned by the Calcu, the witches of Chilean black magic, who summoned them to earth from ardent stones in the form of falling stars. These behemoth horrors would lay deep in the bowels of volcanoes, wreaking havoc across the land, and the only way to satiate their thirst for destruction would be to indulge them in their taste for their favorite meal. And what is that? Virgins, of course! An unknown number of people have been hurled to their doom in these lakes of molten lava, but this ancient tradition wasn't put a stop to until 1960, when Valdivia was struck with the largest earthquake ever recorded with a whopping 9.6 magnitude, the equivalent release of energy comparable to more than 25,000 nuclear bombs. A 5-year-old boy by the name of Jose Luis Pansuar was taken by 2 Machi priests and was sacrificed to cleanse the earth of the Charufe's anger. They were later tried and imprisoned for murder, but were released a couple years later as a judge took sympathy with their plight and ruled that they had acted without free will, driven by an irresistible natural force of ancestral tradition. Yeah, kinda taps the brakes on the whole thing. Deeply troubling stuff, but incredibly fascinating. Anyway, that's all I have for today. If you like this video, feel free to do the thing, and I'll see you next time. But until then, huekalal, or farewell.